But Willie Nelson, Kristofferson, Waylon, Jennings, they are all becoming superstars on this outlaw movement. But still, Billy Joe Shaver wasn't quite there, because when he signed with a record label, the label would fold up. He became discouraged again, quit the business, went back home, but there was that driving force. He remembered his English teacher, and besides that, when he'd play these little gigs, he would send his son, who by now had a lesson, back in the back room to tune his guitar. Eddy Shaver was about 12 or 13 years old by now, and his dad, whose hands would bother him from time to time, son, go back there in the back of the house and tune my guitar. Okay, Dad. Well, about 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, he sent Eddy Shaver back there to the back of the house and said, tune my guitar again. Okay. Well, about 5 minutes later, Billy Joe Shaver heard his son back in the back of that house. He said, oh my God, is that my son putting out some sound like that? As it would turn out, his son Eddy Shaver had a God-given talent. All the times that he had talked to Jesus, well, that was his blessing. And yet the hard times struggled. 1980 came. Billy Joe had been pursuing this dream now for almost 2 decades. His marriage was crumbling. In fact, he would wind up marrying his sweetheart 3 times in his lifetime. Divorce her twice and marry her again. But on one particularly tough evening in Nashville, he decided, I'm going to end it all. He climbed up on top of a mountain. Well, they call them hills in Tennessee. We call them hills here, but they call them mountains there. He got toward the edge of a cliff. He said, that's it. I'm just going to end it all. I'm not going to cause anybody any more troubles or heartaches. I'm going to jump off this cliff and end it all. But he looked up and he saw something in the sky. He'll tell you now, he saw the face of Jesus and his Lord. He walked down from that mountain, and all of a sudden he had esteem. The good Lord had given him esteem. And he thought to himself, you know, I'm not much, but the Lord's got something in store for me. I'm just an old chunk of coal, but I'm going to be a diamond someday. He went home and he wrote those words down. He went to Johnny Cash a few days later. Johnny, I think I've got something here. Johnny Cash looked at it. Yeah, let me record this. Johnny Cash recorded that tune called Old Chunk of Coal. Then in 1981, John Anderson recorded the same song. It went to number 5 on the country charts and was nominated for Country Music Association Song of the Year. 1981 was the year Billy Joe Shaver, after all this struggle, had arrived. But the same problems persisted. But his son's career was taking off better than his was. His son Eddy got a gig playing guitar for Dwight Yoakam's band when Pete Anderson had to leave that band. But in 1989, father and son reunited. Billy Joe made kind of a smart remark. He said, you know, I'm going to have my son play for me. But that's the only way I can get him to play for me, because he's my son. I couldn't afford him otherwise. But Billy Joe and Eddy Shaver teamed up in 1989. And Billy Joe would say, you know, this stuff we're playing is not country. And young Eddy Shaver, who thought of Jimi, Hendrix, as his idol, said, well, this stuff we're playing is not rock and roll or blues either, Dad. Well, maybe all three, both of them were right. Maybe it wasn't country, maybe it wasn't rock, maybe it wasn't blues. But it was a sound that was totally unique. Billy Joe and Eddy Shaver, under the entertainment name Shaver, started producing songs and records that became the hottest ticket that helped Texas music survive. By this time, Waylon and Willie had pretty much, well, Waylon had health problems. Willie was going different directions. And people like Garth Brooks were taking over country music. But people all of a sudden had an alternative to Garth Brooks and Clint Black. They could listen to Billy Joe and Eddy Shaver. And so many Texas music aficionados did exactly that. Billy Joe and Eddy Shaver ruled the 1990s. Albums like Victory, Tramp on Your Street, The Salt of the Earth, and finally, in 1999, a breakthrough CD, Electric Shaver. there was definitely a line drawn between mainstream, watered-down, so-called country music and the real deal. Billy Joe and Eddie Shaver were the real deal. But in the summer of 1999, once again, these hard times engulfed Billy Joe Shaver. Exactly 10 years ago, approaching his birthday, his 60th birthday. In fact, the weekend on August 16th, 1999 was a Monday. The weekend that preceded that Monday, Brenda Shaver succumbed to cancer. It wasn't long after that he also lost his mother, Victory. And on New Year's Eve Day of 2000, about 15 months later, Eddie Shaver passed away with a praying Billy Joe at his bedside. He had been involved in some hard stuff, and he overdosed on drugs. It was a shocking experience. People would never get to hear Eddie Shaver play again. Many people wondered that Billy Joe would ever play again. But Billy Joe was a man that had real faith and real strength and real courage and real persistence. Since then, he's been elected in the Texas Country Music Hall of Fame. He's written a book called Honky Tonk Heroes. He turned 70 on August 16, 2009. He is an icon for sure. Probably the next step for Billy Joe Shaver, and deservedly so, would be to see him be elected into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Let's all send our letters and cards to the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville. Billy Joe Shaver should be there. Go have yourself a historical day. This is Lee Powell. Bye-bye. Happy trail.